The beginning was pretty bad because our main character got stuck in the elevator. It was very difficult for him to be there since the elevator was quite small, and he was not alone there and he had to squint. He did not understand at all how much longer he would have to stay in this elevator, because next to him was a girl who unsuccessfully entered the elevator with him. A couple of hours before, our main character was at home and decided to have a serious conversation with his father about his university. The son was going to leave the university, but his father, of course, didn't like it, because he gave a lot of effort and money so that he could enter the best university. The father was angry with his son for wanting to become a photographer instead of studying properly at university. But his father emotionally told him to leave home if he was going to do that. Thus, our main character quarreled with his father, after which he left his father's house. But he was grateful to his mother because with her help, he now lives completely alone. But in fact, he didn't even want to become a photographer. Our main character just wanted his father to stop controlling his life because he was quite old and could do it himself. Our main character's name is Kang Ji-hyuk. He is currently only 21 years old. He left the university and entered another, so now he is a freshman. Ji-hyuk could no longer stay in his family home because he knew that they would be very surprised if they found out what he was really doing. But now this was not a hindrance for him, and he could calmly be at home all alone, minding his own business. Suddenly, while he was sitting at the computer, someone decided to disturb him by coming to his house early in the morning. It was unexpected. He quickly went to the door and decided to find out who came to him so that he could quickly return to his computer and continue working. But when he opened the door, he was very surprised because it was his neighbor whom he saw for the first time. His neighbor was simply excellent. It even seemed to him that he had never met such beauties as her. She came to him because a package from Ji-hyuk was brought to her house, which was on the floor above. Ji-hyuk realized that the courier was wrong, so he decided to just pick up his package and thank her. But he had a small problem. The neighbor apologized to him because she opened his package thinking it was for her. He decided not to show it and simply said that there was nothing wrong with it, but suddenly he remembered what he ordered. The neighbor was about to calmly give him the package and return to her home, but Ji-hyuk dropped the box from his hands out of excitement, so everything fell. The box fell and all the contents from it too, so the neighbor wanted to help him and took the parcel in her hands, but this embarrassed Ji-hyuk very much and he slipped. As he fell to the ground, something much more shameful happened than what he ordered. He found himself in a more awkward situation. But the neighbor decided not to pay attention to it because she understood that he didn't do it on purpose and simply turned a blind eye to it. But she suddenly noticed that the toy, which she was not supposed to see, fell out of Ji-hyuk's pocket and was right in front of her, which embarrassed her very much. At the same moment, something happened in Ji-hyuk's room that he did not expect at all. His headphones fell to the ground, so the computer switched to the speakers and turned on the movie at full volume. It was the worst situation he could ever find himself in, but he tried to justify himself so that the neighbor would not understand everything wrong. She was very ashamed, so she wasn't even going to listen to him, and just ran away towards the stairs to return to her home and forget about everything. Ji-hyuk was perplexed and stood there for a couple more minutes while the movie played at full volume from his house, and he stood and watched as the neighbor ran away. Some time passed and Ji-hyuk had to go to classes at the university. Ji-hyuk, as if nothing had happened, went to his university because something similar to what happened recently could not await him there. Next to Ji-hyuk sat his friend, who was already waiting for him because he was going to show him something interesting on his phone. His friend decided to show him some interesting photos that were popular now, and this got Ji-hyuk very interested. One of the popular photos was of a recent neighbor, so Ji-hyuk became very interested because he didn't even know that she was popular. As it turned out, the neighbor's name was Jinju-hee. She was a very popular TV presenter and an incredible beauty who, by luck, turned out to be a neighbor. Ji-hyuk and his friend were calmly watching the phone screen when suddenly their calm was destroyed by a voice from behind. It was classmates. Haron just came to the university, so she decided to say hello to them, but she caught them looking at the phone. Ji-hyuk at that moment was lost in his thoughts and completely did not notice what was happening around because he had only recently been next to this celebrity. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by Karan, who invited him to do a joint project with her. He was very surprised at that moment and didn't even understand why she invited him to do a joint project. But after trying to say something, she had already made a decision about it. A friend who was sitting next to Ji-hyuk decided to ask him about how he and Haron became so close. At that moment, it turned out that they met each other during the entrance exams. He considered it a wonderful time. From the very day they met each other and became friends, they lived together. A friend just found out about this, so he decided to take the first step towards a girl he liked, but something happened. As soon as he decided to take the first step towards Somi, she immediately got angry and refused to do a joint project with him, even though he really wanted to get closer to her. The school day was over, so Ji-hyuk was already returning home, but to get up, he needed to use the elevator. This was the main mistake. As soon as the elevator opened, the expression on his face changed, because there he saw a neighbor with whom an awkward situation had happened that morning. Due to the surprise of meeting her, he stood in a stupor and did not move, so she had to speak to him first and ask him to quickly get into the elevator so that they could go. He entered and immediately pressed the button in the elevator. Then he noticed that she lived on the 12th floor. He forgot about it, because in the morning she told him this. Ji-hyuk used this elevator every day, but today the atmosphere was very different for him from usual. He stood behind and watched her. He still couldn't believe that she was a celebrity because in a regular shirt she looked like an office worker. At this moment, Junji began to get angry because she felt eyes on her and felt uncomfortable because of this. She couldn't believe that he was doing this so brazenly and considered him a bad person because of what happened that morning. Suddenly, the elevator shook and they were very scared. At that moment, the elevator stopped and they were stuck there. They were very scared because they were afraid that they would fall. But after trying to press the emergency bell, Ji-hyuk discovered that it did not work. Chunji was very scared because of this, because she was afraid to stay there. At that moment, Ji-hyuk decided to calm her down by saying that he had a phone, but it was a mistake. Turning on the phone, he noticed that he had no connection on it, which meant that they were stuck there until they were found. Right in front of Ji-hyuk, she fell to the ground from excitement, so he immediately began to try to calm her down, saying that they would soon be pulled out of there. He asked Ju-hee to sit in the elevator, but she got a little tense because he called her by a name she didn't tell him. Then he decided to tell it like it is, and told her that his classmates showed photos today, and then he found out that Ju-hee was famous. After what he told her, she became much calmer because she found out how he found out about her. Now she knew that he was not a maniac. But she believed that it was dishonest, because only he knew the name, and she knew nothing about him. So at that moment, they met each other. They were talking to each other, but suddenly the light went out in the elevator, which scared them both very much. Ju-hee was very afraid of the dark, so she didn't even notice how she jumped out of her place towards Ji-hyuk. Ji-hyuk noticed that she was very worried and afraid at that moment, so he again began to calm her down, despite the situation in which they found themselves. He was trying to calm her down, so he started telling her what he learned from the movie, which was that elevators had a lot of safety measures, so they would be fine. Ju-hee realized at that moment that Ji-hyuk was trying to calm her down, because he noticed that she was nervous. At that moment, she thanked him for it, and it really helped her calm down a little. She decided that her first impression of him was wrong, because he is a good guy. At the same time, Karine was at home and working on her laptop, but she decided to take a short break due to fatigue. During this break, she wanted to call Ji-hyuk, but the calls did not reach him, so she thought that he was sleeping, because she did not believe that he had a girlfriend. Ji-hyuk was on the edge at this time, because it was very difficult for him to restrain himself in such a situation due to his desire to play. It became more and more difficult, so he could no longer do anything about the obvious desires to play, which Ju-hee accidentally noticed in the dark. Having learned about this, Ju-hee did not immediately understand what she had just seen, so she decided to make sure and accidentally pressed the game button. She didn't understand at all what she was playing with, so she thought that it was an ordinary lighter but didn't know that they could be so big. Ji-hyuk was on the edge and didn't know what to do in such a situation, because he thought that if he told her about it, she would consider him bad. At that moment, on the contrary, she calmed down due to the fact that she was using the toy, and this embarrassed him even more, because she didn't stop. Ji-hyuk understood that it was very dangerous because while she was playing, he felt very strange and could not do anything about it. This game was approaching a dangerous moment, but Ji-hyuk managed to stop Ju-hee in time and tell her what she just did. She was very surprised and felt very ashamed, so she immediately stopped and stopped playing. Ju-hee stopped playing, but Ji-hyuk was already on the edge, so he lost his mind for a second and asked Ju-hee to continue playing. At that moment, she was very surprised by this and could not believe that she really heard it now. Ji-hyuk was about to start playing, but at that moment she pushed him away and this helped him come to his former senses. He immediately realized what he had just nearly done, so he immediately began to apologize to her, because he really didn't mean it. Despite what he just did, she didn't want to blame him for anything because they were both mistaken, and it was she who started it. They continued talking when suddenly the lights in the elevator suddenly turned on and the door opened. They immediately saw the security guard, who was surprised, because he did not expect to see people there at all, since this elevator is rarely used. The door opened and Ju-hee immediately ran out of there. Ji-hyuk thought that it was all because of him and blamed himself. But after that, he had no choice but to simply return to his home after such a crazy day and relax. But suddenly Ju-hee was next to him and came to him. He was very surprised at that moment, because he didn't expect that she would want to see him. She came to him to apologize to him for running away from the elevator. But he was not angry with her because he understood that it was normal in such a situation and decided to ask why she came to him. She told him that she didn't know what happened to her after that incident, and he immediately understood everything. He called her home so that they would not talk right on the threshold, but in fact he believed that he was not mistaken. Immediately after that, he went home with her and decided to start the game. But she did not continue to pretend for long that she had not come for this, although he was sure. This moment was completely his, but he was a little worried because it was the first time he found himself in such a situation, although his confidence had increased. Juhi noticed that he was very worried, so she decided to calm him down and help him so that he could play quickly. He was very happy about this and almost started the game, but suddenly his alarm clock on his phone began to ring, which did not turn off. Then Juhi told him that it was time for him to wake up, because it was all a dream. He woke up and was out of sorts again. After that incident, he tried to contact Juhi every day, but nothing worked for him. Several days had passed since that incident, but he still could not forget it, and because of this he slept very poorly, because he continued to dream about her. Suddenly they started knocking on his door. At first he was happy because he thought it was Juhi, but then he realized that this was unlikely, and went to open the door. He opened the door but saw Haron outside the door. Ji-hyuk was very surprised at this moment, and reacted as if he didn't want to see Haron there at all. Because of his reaction, she became very angry, but went into the house and told him that she had come to go to university with him. They lived in the same house, so earlier Ji-hyuk told her that they could sometimes go to university together. He remembered this, so he quickly went to get ready for the university, so as not to keep her waiting. She stayed in the room and thought that she had not been in this house for a long time, although she had often been there before entering the university. Suddenly she wanted to sleep, so she didn't even have time to notice how she fell asleep on the bed. Ji-hyuk had already collected all his things and went into the room to call her, but noticed that she had fallen asleep. Noticing how she was sleeping, he thought that the atmosphere between them had changed a lot after entering the university, because before he had only seen her as a younger sister. She woke up and noticed that he was just standing at the doorway, so she thought that he was trying to watch her. But even though this was not the case, she decided to let him watch because she considered him her hero. At that moment, Ji-hyuk was very surprised because he didn't expect something like that from her at all. She considered him a hero, but it wasn't exactly like that. That day, they became close for the first time. After graduating from school, he began to prepare for his next education, namely university studies. In those days, he was all alone and tried his best to prove his worth to his father so that his father would be proud of him. That's when they first met each other at the preparatory center. In fact, this was not the case because they had met each other before, but they had never communicated or knew anything about each other. Haron was a girl who stood out from others due to her beauty. By the time they left the preparatory center, it was already late at night, so their parents came to pick them up. Mom came to pick up Haron's friend that day again, but Ji-hyuk noticed one peculiarity. He didn't know the truth, but he noticed that her parents never came to pick her up, just like they did to pick him up, so they inevitably had to get closer. He was returning on his way home looking at his phone, but suddenly he heard screams from a dark alley. It was a Haron who was in danger because bandits grabbed her and tried to rob her, taking all her money. But Haron was very lucky at that moment because Ji-hyuk was passing nearby who did not pass by, turning a blind eye to it. The second bandit, who stood as a watchman, tried to persuade Ji-hyuk to go on his way and not pretend to be a hero, but he instantly found himself on the ground. As soon as Ji-hyuk dealt with the first bandit, he turned and asked the second what he was going to do. But the second bandit was already very scared because he saw his capabilities and immediately gave up. So Ji-hyuk allowed him to leave from there. She was very surprised but immediately began to thank him for his help, after which he decided to walk her home so that something like this wouldn't happen again. On the way to the house, he decided to get to know her, so he started asking her about everything because he knew that she was also going to the preparatory center. They reached her house, and at that moment, by a lucky chance, it turned out that they lived in the same building and were neighbors. It was really cool, and Karen decided to suggest that after this we sometimes get together after class to go for a walk. After that day, Ji-hyuk and Haron became close friends, so she often came home to play, but today was something different. It was the first time he found himself in such a position next to Haron when she invited him to play. Right now he should have refused her offer, but he froze. He could not make even the slightest sound. Ji-hyuk stood and could not say even one word, when suddenly she herself decided to start a demonstration of toys, which embarrassed him very much. He couldn't believe that this was really happening, and didn't even understand how they got to this point. Ji-hyuk saw the toy, and at that moment, Haron suddenly took out her phone and took a photo of it. So she decided to make fun of him and did not regret it, because his facial expression was very funny at that moment. This joke made him very angry, so he forbade her to come home without permission and asked her to delete this photo. After all this, they left the house and went to the university, otherwise they would have been late. Karen was immediately met by her friend and called to the place they occupied today, and Ji-hyuk went to his friends who at that moment were enthusiastically looking at something. As soon as he approached, he immediately found out that it was an advertisement for Joo-hee. Ji-hyuk didn't want to see this ad in his class, so he asked his friend to go to the back room with him. They were watching a live commercial and an accident happened because Joo-hee didn't seem to be in the best light. But Ji-hyuk's friend at that moment was very happy to see what was in this advertisement, so Ji-hyuk upset him a little and straightened his brains out. Immediately after this, Ji-hyuk asked his friend not to show him anything like that again. He couldn't even believe that he would ever hear something like that from him. They left there and were about to return to their homes, but a friend invited him to go for a walk with them. But Ji-hyuk refused, saying that he had business. As it turned out, Ji-hyuk worked part-time at a supermarket, but he worked intermittently and now he needed money again, so he will be busy. His best friend walked him to the apartment and said goodbye to him. The friend was confused because he couldn't believe that Ji-hyuk lived in such a house without money. At the same time, Joo-hee was in the recording studio talking to the manager of this promotional show where everything happened. The manager was a little upset because he didn't know that this could happen, but now he understood that he was unlikely to help her because it was a live broadcast. The guy found himself in a rather difficult situation because now it was very difficult for him to negotiate with management, but he continued to support the girl. Immediately after this, the guy decided to invite Joo-hee to dinner, but she refused him, saying that her next few days would be very busy. But he wasn't going to give up, so he asked her to call him as soon as she was free and she agreed. He was about to leave, but suddenly Jisoo appeared at the door and came to Joo-hee. She came to her and apologized because she had now taken her place, but she wanted to help her, so she offered to jointly advertise. At the same time, Ji-hyuk was at work and serving clients, but he had a free minute, so he decided to sit down and rest a little. At this moment, he again remembered that unsuccessful advertising scene and decided to watch it again. He couldn't stop. This annoyed him very much because he could not stop watching it, but suddenly a customer came in, so he stood behind the cash register. This customer was Joo-hee, and she was very surprised when she saw her neighbor behind the counter in the store. She came to the store and decided to buy a lot of juices, when suddenly at the checkout, Ji-hyuk decided to ask her about her health. Ji-hyuk was about to tell her that he saw what happened on TV in the commercial, but suddenly he thought that she might get angry. Fortunately, this was not the case, and she calmly asked him if he was asking about the unsuccessful advertisement. Then he relaxed a little and told her that he was very worried about her, because it seemed to him that it would be difficult for her after such a failure. He was worried about something he saw that went viral very quickly and is still gaining popularity. Suddenly, she interrupted him and decided to ask him about when his workday ends, because she wanted to invite him home so that he would keep her company. The store was far away and Joo-hee was returning from work, so she was in the car and driving home. Suddenly, she got a call on her phone and she answered the call from the car. It was Karen. As it turned out, Haron was Joo-hee's daughter. This is just a shocking event. The daughter was worried about her mother and called her because she knew about what happened. Suddenly, Joo-hee thought that this event could affect Haron's life, so she began to worry a lot. But Karen quickly reassured her mother that none of her friends knew that she was a mother. After this event, Joo-hee met Ji-hyuk in the store and invited him to go home with her. The workday ended and they went to the house together. Joo-hee was surprised because Ji-hyuk had a pretty clean house for a guy. Ji-hyuk didn't think about it at all at that moment. He was shocked and didn't even suspect that they would be in the same house. After work, they first went to a restaurant to spend time together. But there they caught a lot of looks. Ji-hyuk knew that she would feel uncomfortable being there because everyone was looking at her, so he suggested that she go to a quieter place. They sat down at the table and started talking to each other. Then Joo-hee learned a lot of new things about him. He told her that he left home, so now he works in a store and lives alone. While talking about this, Ji-hyuk told her that one day he will have to move out of this house too. They drank juices and talked to each other, but Ji-hyuk was worried about something because she drank these juices very quickly. Suddenly, Joo-hee received a message on her phone, and she immediately grabbed it. Ji-hyuk wasn't even surprised because he thought that she had a boyfriend because she was a very beautiful girl, but he wasn't going to get involved in this. Joo-hee was very angry, so he decided to ask her who wrote to her. It was the manager from the company who calmed her down after that incident. Suddenly, Joo-hee asked Ji-hyuk if he had a girlfriend, and at that moment he thought about Haron and was very embarrassed because they had not even met. He answered her that he had no one, because his studies interfered with his studies and he could not concentrate on one thing. Then Joo-hee decided to make fun of him and suddenly began to approach him when she suddenly grabbed a toy from under the sofa and started laughing. He was very ashamed and asked her to return the toy, but she refused him this request. She told him that she would not return this toy because he would continue to use this toy and would completely forget how to talk to girls. Suddenly, she offered him something interesting, namely to play with another toy that she had. He became very embarrassed at that moment and began to think that this was just a harmless joke on her part. Ji-hyuk was fully aware that this was just a simple joke, but still decided to ask her to let her play with another toy. Suddenly, she started laughing and decided to pretend that she was just joking because he was so innocent that she could not help but do so. But Ji-hyuk wasn't going to give up so easily, so he repeated to her that he said this in all seriousness. At that moment, she decided to confess to him and allowed him to take the toy because she was also not joking at that moment, but was shy. She was embarrassed to admit it, and she was careful with him because he was an innocent boy and would probably regret it later. But Ji-hyuk wasn't even going to think about it, and immediately went to play with another toy. Meanwhile, Haron was at her home and received a message from her mother, who said that she was at a neighbor's friend's house. Then she calmed down and decided to go to bed, because she was sure that everything would be fine with her mother. Ji-hyuk was playing with Joo-hee at that moment, and they were enjoying this time. He couldn't believe that this was really happening, but she really liked it, because she understood that it was his first time playing.